At dawn on the 16th of July 1945, the Alamogordo Desert lay still in darkness. The wind whistled across the mounds of earth, dust hovered in the air, and no one spoke a word. When the clock struck 5 hours, 29 minutes and 45 seconds, a flash of light appeared, then erupted into a gigantic fireball. According to the Los Alamos test report, the shockwave radius extended over 16 kilometers, with an explosive yield of 21 kilotons of TNT. The sky turned white as if it were daytime, and the ground trembled as though the entire planet had just been awakened. Robert Oppenheimer exhaled softly, eyes fixed on the glowing sphere, his voice fading into the hot wind. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." And in that instant, America stepped across the threshold of the atomic age. Outside the observation bunker, General Leslie Groves recorded the moment of detonation in his leather notebook. He said nothing more, only nodded slightly to the engineering team. Some laughed, some trembled. The feeling of pride and fear blended, as if they had just witnessed both a miracle and a warning. According to the Manhattan District Diary, the explosion could be seen from 200 miles away. As the mushroom cloud rose higher than 12 kilometers, everyone knew the war was about to end, but the world would never be the same again. At that very moment, in Moscow, inside a sealed room at NKVD headquarters, Lavrentiy Beria sat before a long wooden table. White neon light shone down on the surface, scattered with files marked S Project. A report had just been placed before him. Details on the plutonium chain reaction, 99.96% purity, 6.2 kilograms core mass. The report came from New Mexico, passed through 3 layers of encryption, hand to hand, from San Francisco to Vladivostok, then to Moscow in just 48 hours. According to later declassified KGB records, Beria read that report on the same afternoon the United States tested its bomb. He smiled, set the paper down, and murmured, "They've done it. Now it's our turn to begin." Between those two worlds, one exploding in light, the other motionless amid the cold snow, lay a paradox unlike anything history had ever known. The Manhattan Project was guarded at the highest security level of the century, involving over 130,000 people, costing $2 billion USD, spread across 3 ultra-secret sites, Oak Ridge, Hanford, and Los Alamos. Each scientist knew only a fragment of their own task. Every letter, every phone call was monitored. Groves had once told the War Department, "There will be no leaks. This project is tighter than the Navy Code." But he was wrong. Within that dense wall of security, a few small figures had opened a door no one noticed. According to CIC counterintelligence files, since 1942, the NKVD had infiltrated the American scientific system through research programs in Berkeley and Chicago. The first data on uranium decay was transmitted via diplomatic channels, hidden inside a fountain pen. No one imagined that dry mathematical formulas could be the most dangerous weapon of all. And when the Trinity light burst over the New Mexico sky, the technical blueprints had already reached Moscow months before. In Alamogordo, after the mushroom cloud settled, no one spoke further. They looked at one another, quietly packing their instruments. A young engineer wrote in his journal, "It was more beautiful than anything I've ever seen, and more terrible than I could ever imagine." In Moscow, Beria opened the window, gazing out at the snow-covered street. Outside, the city remained silent. He knew the Soviet Union did not yet have the bomb, but it possessed something far more important, the detailed blueprint to build one. And in that silence, history shifted. America had just reached the pinnacle of science, where human intellect commanded the energy of the stars. Yet at the same moment, that very triumph marked the first fracture in the world of absolute knowledge. Under the light of Trinity, the Americans believed they had created the tool to end war. They did not know that, across the ocean, another man was smiling, waiting for the day that same light would rise from the north. The desk at Los Alamos still smelled of cigarette smoke, papers scattered across the floor. In Moscow, the last typist left the room as night fell, leaving Beria alone with the bomb schematic. He placed his hand on the sheet and closed his eyes. The lamp's reflection glimmered in the window frame, sparkling like fragments from that distant explosion. And across 5,000 miles, the same secret lived, breathed, and prepared to create a new world. In the spring of 1942, when the war in Europe was at its fiercest, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the order to establish the Manhattan Project, a top-secret program assigned to the Army Corps of Engineers and the nation's leading scientists. "We must harness the power of the atom before our enemies do," Roosevelt said in a meeting at the White House, according to the War Department memo, March 1942. At that time, the goal was not destruction, but to end the war through science. America was betting on intellect to put an end to the devastation suffered by millions. From Washington to Los Alamos, the air was tense with both faith and urgency. In every office of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, drawings, models, and formulas piled up on desks, Roosevelt believed that the free world must win through knowledge. The Manhattan Project became the embodiment of that belief, gathering over 130,000 engineers, scientists, workers, and soldiers spread across Oak Ridge, Hanford, and Los Alamos. According to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers report, 1,946, the official budget of the program reached $2 billion USD, an unprecedented figure for a scientific project. In that context, the United States regarded the Soviet Union as a loyal ally in the fight against fascism. American diplomats often referred to Moscow as our brother in arms. The FBI and Army CIC focused their full efforts on tracking German and Japanese spies, while those carrying Soviet passports who moved in and out of research facilities were still considered safe. According to the CIC Counterintelligence Bulletin, 1,943, only 3% of espionage investigations at the time involved Soviet citizens, compared to 82% targeting Germans. The wartime mindset led America to believe that the real threat came from Berlin and Tokyo, not from Moscow, which was then suffering heavy casualties at Stalingrad. But in the shadows, another front was taking shape. Since 1942, the NKVD had begun implementing a campaign to gather scientific information in the United States through diplomatic and academic channels. They knew that Americans were confident, and that confidence could be exploited. According to the declassified Venona file 231-1945, Soviet operatives focused on scientific contacts rather than military targets. They approached young scientists, particularly those with leftist leanings, through research clubs and scientific conferences. Those seemingly harmless meetings became gateways to one of the largest information leaks of the century. Inside the Manhattan Project, the leadership believed that the industrial and technological gap between the US and the Soviet Union was too vast. General Leslie Groves wrote in a 1944 report, "The Soviet Union lacks both the materials and the scientific capacity to compete within 2 decades." According to the War Department Ordnance Review, 1945, American military experts estimated that the Soviet Union would need at least 20 years to reach comparable nuclear technology. They did not know that in Moscow, a team of engineers and physicists was already translating documents obtained from Los Alamos. That strategic confidence became a veil covering serious security gaps. In Los Alamos, scientists were encouraged to focus on progress rather than suspicion. We were racing the Germans, not watching our friends. An engineer from Oppenheimer's team recalled in a 1965 interview, "That was the spirit of wartime America: trust, collaboration, and pursuit of a shared victory. But in the world of intelligence, trust is the most dangerous gift." As the war drew to a close, this invisible front expanded. The NKVD extended its networks to Berkeley, Chicago, and even New York, where they used the embassy as a transfer point for materials. A 1952 post-war CIA report stated, between 1942 and 1945, Soviet intelligence had infiltrated at least 3 of the 10 major research facilities connected to atomic studies. That infiltration made no noise and left no trace, only precise copies of original blueprints and data that seemed meaningless. As the guns in Europe fell silent, a new war had begun, a war of intellect and secrets. America believed it controlled knowledge, while the Soviet Union believed it was balancing power. And in the quiet space between those beliefs, the first seeds of the Cold War took root, silent, precise, unnoticed. Before moving to the next part, if this story resonates with you, please like and share so more people can see it. Leave your thoughts in the comments, as every word from you will motivate us to create even more compelling videos. In the white corridors of the Los Alamos laboratory, where every sheet of paper bore a classified label, a man quietly walked between two worlds. His name was Klaus Fuchs. Born in 1911 inches Germany, Fuchs grew up in an intellectual, anti-fascist family. When the Nazis came to power, he fled to England and was later recruited into the nuclear research group at the University of Birmingham. Documents from the British Mission Report, 1942 state, Dr. Fuchs showed exceptional mathematical precision in nuclear cross-section analysis. That precision led him to Los Alamos, the top-secret center of the Manhattan Project, where the greatest minds in the world were transforming theory into energy. Fuchs quickly adapted to the rhythm of the base. He drew little attention, always punctual, always modest. During group meetings, he often sat slightly behind others, taking meticulous notes, never speaking more than 2 sentences. Yet colleagues remembered that whenever Oppenheimer presented a formula, Fuchs was the first to spot an error. An American physicist recalled after the war, "He didn't smile much, but he saw everything." According to the Los Alamos personnel log, 1944, he was responsible for calculating neutron distribution in the plutonium core, the very heart of the bomb. Beyond the numbers, there was another storm within Fuchs. He once wrote in his 1950 confession, "I was not seeking money or glory. I was seeking balance." That sentence is the key to understanding his motive. As a refugee who had witnessed Europe torn apart by war, Fuchs believed that if a single nation monopolized such a weapon, the world's order would tilt irrevocably. "If only one nation has the bomb, there will never be safety," he told his NKVD contact in Santa Fe, according to Venona transcript 289, 1944. Meanwhile, at Los Alamos, Robert Oppenheimer lived within a different paradox. He believed in the power of knowledge, but also understood that every equation here could be measured in millions of lives. "The physicists have known sin," he said in a 1948 interview, his voice heavy as though bearing a sentence. These two men, one representing American intellect, the other European fear, shared a common faith that science could save the world from the ignorance of war. At Los Alamos, Fuchs worked in the Fat Man plutonium group, responsible for calculating the critical mass, the minimum amount needed for a self-sustaining chain reaction, according to U.S. Army Technical Report. A 213, 1945, the data Fuchs had access to included the full design of a weapon using 6.2 kilograms of plutonium, an expected explosive yield of 21 kilotons of TNT, and neutron reflector configurations. Just weeks after reviewing the documents, he copied the formulas from memory, compressed them onto tiny scraps of paper, hid them inside pencil casings, and passed them to an intermediary. On the other side, the recipient of those notes was Alexander Feklisov, an NKVD agent operating under the cover of a Soviet consulate employee in New York. According to KGB memoir of Feklisov, 1969, Fuchs never spoke about politics. He would hand over the information and walk away without looking back. He acted like a priest confessing his faith, Feklisov wrote. In the long winter nights of 1944, as snow thickened on the window panes, the first copies of the fission bomb design left American soil, drifting across the ocean toward Moscow. During that same period, Oppenheimer still believed his project remained secure. He said at a meeting in New Mexico, "No one beyond these walls knows what we are building." Yet the man sitting a few rows away, quietly noting each number, already knew exactly where it was headed. Fuchs understood he was committing betrayal, but to him, It was the only way to prevent a greater catastrophe. When the war ended, Fuchs did not flee. He returned to England and continued teaching physics at the Harwell Laboratory. No one suspected anything until 1950, when the decrypted Venona cables revealed the telegrams between him and Moscow. He confessed everything, calm as a man who had fulfilled his duty. "I had to keep the balance of the world," he said in court. Oppenheimer heard the news on the radio and gave only one brief reply. He was brilliant. Two men, two beliefs, two visions of peace. One created the light of the Trinity, the other shared it with the world. And between them, the atomic age was born radiant, cold, and full of contradictions. On the surface, the Manhattan Project looked like a gigantic factory run by people and data, but inside it was a sophisticated organizational craft. The United States deployed 3 principal centers, each responsible for a link in the chain of nuclear weapons production. Oak Ridge was responsible for uranium enrichment, Hanford produced plutonium, and Los Alamos designed the weapons and oversaw testing. According to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers report, 1,946, this model combined heavy industry, advanced science, and military administration to turn theory into a practical explosion. The time from groundbreaking to the Trinity detonation was 28 months, a pace many historians call extraordinary. The technique of theft was not improvised, but a procedural system. The NKVD established symmetric operations at America's academic and industrial centers. Berkeley, Chicago, and Los Alamos all had points of contact. Important information was not transmitted in a single instance, but followed a chain. Documents were carefully photocopied or transcribed, then encoded, sent through intermediary channels, and finally received and decoded in Moscow. According to Venona transcripts and post-war counterintelligence reports, the encoding and transmission steps reduced the risk of detection while increasing the speed of technical document transfer. Recipients in the Soviet Union did not receive only drawings. They received methods of notation, organizational structure, and operational procedures. The tools of the network were very ordinary, yet unexpectedly effective. Small cameras, microfilm, notes hidden in pen casings, compressed handwritten data packets all became parts of a technical collection cycle. A later intelligence specialist described the work as an assembly line, each link adding a layer of insurance. The courier photographed the documents, the encoder turned words into symbols, the sender used diplomatic channels or secure communication networks to transmit them, and finally, on the other end, a technical team reconstructed the originals. This process delivered information to Moscow that was sufficiently detailed for Soviet engineers to recreate design models. The technical aspects of the bomb that the agents transmitted were not vague numbers. The U-235 content in natural uranium is 71%, a baseline figure for understanding enrichment requirements. The mass of plutonium in the Fat Man bomb was 6.2 kilograms, the number that determined the critical mass. The achieved purity reached 99.96%, the refinement level allowing a stable chain reaction. These values, when combined with parameters on casing structure, neutron reflection, and core dimensions, formed the formula for a team of engineers to reconstruct a weapon. According to Los Alamos technical summaries, 1,945, it was precisely these parameters that determined yield targets, reaction stability, and detonation effectiveness. The efficiency of the espionage system lay in the fact that the Soviet Union did not merely copy designs, they learned to copy operational methodology, that is, an art within an art. The Americans had invented an organizational model to produce an entirely new type of weapon, one that encompassed security standards, professional procedures, and labor discipline. But that very process was observed, analyzed, and replicated by others. As a result, when the Trinity flash lit up the New Mexico desert, Moscow already had enough pieces to begin assembling a similar system. In the laboratory, American engineers continued to optimize designs, consult equations, and refine data. They ate sandwiches in silence and recorded every figure. At the other end of the ocean, the information recipients opened files, ran simulations, and jotted into notebooks what needed to be produced. The engineering of espionage, at this level, was a cold achievement of organized thought. It turned documents into tools, words into an assembly line, and proprietary knowledge into a replicable product. And in the silence after the numbers, one truth emerged. America had created a system perfect enough to change history, yet that same system taught its adversary how to think, how to act, and how to prevail in their own way. At dawn on the 16th of July 1945, the skies over Alamogordo were thick with clouds and dust. The soldiers guarding the test site were ordered to lie flat on the ground, eyes closed, mouths open, to lessen the pressure when the blast wave struck. At the command center 16 kilometers away, General Leslie Groves stood beside Robert Oppenheimer, his hands gripping a pair of binoculars. When the clock struck 5 hours 29 minutes and 45 seconds, light flared, tearing the night apart. A column of fire rose straight up, expanding into a mushroom shape, reaching higher than 12 kilometers. "This is the greatest scientific achievement in history," Groves exclaimed, his voice trembling slightly. According to the U.S. Army Technical Evaluation 1945, the explosion had a yield of 21 kilotons of TNT, produced pressure waves extending up to 16 kilometers, and was visible from 200 miles away. Oppenheimer said nothing, his eyes following the glow as it shifted from orange to white. He recalled a verse from the Bhagavad Gita, then whisperingly, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Some scientists began to cry. Others laughed or held their heads in their hands. In just a few seconds, all the equations, numbers, and blueprints of the past 2 years condensed into one blinding flash that seemed to rip the sky open. According to the Los Alamos test diary, the temperature at the blast's core exceeded 10 million degrees Celsius, and the pressure was strong enough to fuse the sand into glass. They called it Trinitite. When the shock wave subsided, the air grew thick. The soldiers rose slowly, staring at the vast grey clouds spreading outward, heavy and dense like the ashes of an old world. A young engineer wrote in his journal, "It was like watching the sun rise on command." Inside the observation bunker, Groves turned to Oppenheimer. Both men were silent. "We did it," Groves said, then added softly, "Let's hope it ends the war." No one replied. At the same moment, in Moscow, within the NKVD headquarters, Lavrentiy Beria entered the chamber of classified files, where the steel-lined walls reflected white light. An officer handed him a report sealed in red, the handwritten title reading, "New Mexico Test, Theoretical Concordance 98%. 2 days after the explosion, according to Venona File 291, 1945, Moscow had already received a detailed compilation of yield, chain reaction structure, and radiation data, transmitted from New York through diplomatic channels to Vladivostok. Beria read silently, tapping his fingers on the desk, then looked up at the map on the wall behind him. He said, "They've done it. So will we." Later that same afternoon, the report reached Joseph Stalin. The secretary recorded that the Soviet leader glanced at a few lines, then said curtly, "Good, we will have ours soon." According to the Soviet archives, 1952, the subsequent Politburo meeting lasted only 11 minutes, just long enough to issue the emergency directive for the RDS-1 program, the Soviet atomic bomb project. The blueprints sent by Fuchs became the foundation of that plan, while in Alamogordo, the Americans still believed they held an absolute secret. In Moscow, a team of engineers had already begun drafting their first design. Between those two skies, humanity seemed to split in half. In New Mexico, the scientists saw a brilliant yet uncertain future. In the Soviet Union, the engineers saw an opportunity to balance the world. The same light carried two meanings, one of triumph, the other of pursuit. One side saw victory, the other saw the beginning of a race. That evening at Los Alamos, Groves opened the summary report. According to preliminary estimates, he wrote, the weapon performed beyond expectation, with yield exceeding projections by approximately 15%. The dim light shone over his trembling hands. He knew he had just witnessed something that would change humanity. In the corner of the room, Oppenheimer sat motionless. In his notebook, he wrote a single, unsteady line, "The physicists have known sin." Meanwhile, in Moscow, Beria poured a cup of tea, thin steam rising and mingling with the smoke of his cigarette. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, imagining the explosion in the west, then turned to his aide and said, "Time to catch up." Outside the window, snow fell silently over the Moskva River, reflecting the faint yellow glow of streetlights. In that quiet, the world entered the nuclear age. From that moment on, the Earth was no longer united under a single Sunday. The light of Trinity had split humanity into two poles, one blazing with pride, the other burning with challenge. As the night passed, both still looked up at the same sky, but each saw a different future. And in that silence, the world split. On the morning of the 29th of August, 1949, across the steppes of Semipalatinsk, Kazakhstan, a flash burst across the clear sky. It was RDS-1, the first Soviet atomic bomb. According to the Soviet Ministry of Medium Machine Building report, 1,950, the explosion yield reached 22 kilotons, nearly identical to America's Fat Man. Within 4 years, the Soviet Union had accomplished what Americans once believed would take at least 20 years. Those figures spread through Washington like a cold storm. The CIA report submitted to President Truman stated succinctly, "The monopoly is over." In Washington, a heavy atmosphere filled the defense offices. During an emergency meeting at the White House, Truman placed his hand on the table, his gaze firm. He said, "We will not be driven by fear. We will lead through science." That statement opened the era of America's nuclear doctrine, announced later in 1949, pledging that the United States would lead in the use of science for global security. According to the presidential address, December 1949, the goal was not retaliation but the shaping of a new order built on knowledge and deterrence. For America, nuclear weapons were not merely tools of war but symbols of responsible intellectual power. The world's balance shifted overnight. If before, the United States had been the sole sun in the nuclear sky, now a second sun had risen from the north. Both shone opposed and vigilant toward each other. This race had no gunfire, yet it was fiercer than any war before it. According to the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission Bulletin 1951, America's nuclear research budget rose from $380 million in 1948 to over $1.2 billion just 2 years later. Facilities at Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, and Argonne were doubled in size. More than 50 new research reactors were built in the 1,950 seconds, along with 3 civilian atomic energy centers located in Idaho, Illinois, and Tennessee. While the Soviet Union focused on replicating weapons technology, the United States pivoted toward applied science and civilian energy. According to the U.S. Department of Energy Historical Summary, 1955, within 5 years after the RDS-1 test, the United States had operated its first reactors designed for stable electricity generation, transforming wartime knowledge into tools for development. In Chicago, the Argonne Institute became the training center for the first generation of atomic scientists who later built the foundation of the world's clean energy industry. At the same time, the Soviet Union launched numerous military programs from hydrogen bomb development to long-range strategic weapons testing. According to the Central Intelligence Agency brief, 1952, the technical gap between the two sides was no longer significant, but the difference lay in purpose. The United States sought to prove that nuclear power could coexist with moral responsibility and scientific transparency, while the Soviet Union viewed it as a shield for survival. Two paths diverged from a single explosion in Alamogordo, both aimed at one thing: controlling fear. In that context, the United States maintained its role as leader. In 1953, President Dwight D. Eisenhower addressed the United Nations, introducing the Atoms for Peace program. According to UN proceedings, December 1953, he declared, The United States pledges to share the benefits of atomic knowledge for the progress of mankind. That statement was regarded as the first humanitarian declaration of the nuclear age. After the speech, more than 40 nations submitted requests for scientific cooperation, opening the largest civilian atomic data exchange program in history. On the surface, the nuclear race resembled a game of power, but on a deeper level, it was a moral test of humanity. America understood that secrecy was no longer enough. It had to create trust. It turned the weapons that once destroyed 2 cities into the foundations of energy, medicine, and aerospace. According to the National Science Foundation record, 1,957, more than 70% of the engineers who had served in the Manhattan Project later moved into civilian sectors. From the ashes of Hiroshima, they built a new world with the same knowledge that had once spread fear. If the Soviet Union triumphed through stolen information, America triumphed through vision. It did not merely make bombs, it built a global knowledge management system where science became a shared language among nations. According to the Atomic Energy Commission, 1959, America's nuclear program had trained over 12,000 international experts, most from Europe and Asia, laying the foundation for modern energy development. The 2 suns continued to shine in the same sky, one ignited by fear, the other by faith. And within that orbit, the United States held the role of guide, transforming the light of destruction into the light of understanding. The race did not end with yield or detonations, but with a deeper question: who would use knowledge to preserve life and not let it consume itself? In the winter of 1950, the London sky hung heavy with grey fog. Inside the courtroom of Old Bailey, Klaus Fuchs stood before the bench. He wore round glasses, his face calm and expressionless. Before him lay an indictment of more than 300 pages, listing a series of charges related to the transfer of atomic secrets to the Soviet Union. "Do you plead guilty?" the prosecutor asked. Fuchs replied briefly, "Yes." According to the British court record, February 1950, the verdict concluded that he had provided Moscow with data on the Fat Man bomb design and plutonium research documents. The sentence: 14 years in prison. As he left the courtroom, he told a reporter, his voice barely a whisper, "I only wanted to prevent another war." 2 years later, in New York, the U.S. Federal District Court heard the most famous espionage case of the early Cold War, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. The evidence against them rested on the testimony of David Greenglass, Ethel's brother, an engineer who had worked at Los Alamos, according to the U.S. District Court transcript 1951, Greenglass admitted to copying blueprints of the neutron-reflecting explosive device and passing them to Julius. Though the evidence remained disputed, the sentence was still declared death. On the 19th of June, 1953, the couple was executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing prison. "This is not justice. This is hysteria," the defense attorney said in his final appeal. They died in silence, amid the shouts of the crowd outside. At the same time, across the country, Robert Oppenheimer entered the hearing room of the Atomic Energy Commission, AEC. He was accused of being disloyal to national interests for opposing the development of the hydrogen bomb. In the AEC hearing transcript, 1954, Oppenheimer responded firmly, "I have no regrets for my opposition to further destruction." Though not convicted, he was stripped of his top-secret clearance, effectively ending his nuclear career. As he stepped out of the building, he told his close friend Edward Teller, "The power we unleashed has changed not just science, but conscience." Teller looked at him and quietly replied, "And that is your true legacy." 3 people, 3 destinies, all bound in the web of what they themselves had created. Knowledge. Each believed in a separate truth, and each paid for it. According to the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission Review, 1955, the Fuchs and Rosenberg cases led Washington to tighten scientific security so severely that hundreds of physicists were removed from defense projects. Yet from those ashes, a new generation emerged. The ones who had built the bomb now turned to rebuild the world. After the Manhattan Project was dissolved, over 3,000 engineers and scientists shifted to civilian fields. Many joined NASA, bringing with them wartime project management experience and the creativity forged under pressure. According to the NASA Historical Data Book, 1,960, 42% of the engineering team in the Mercury and Gemini programs had once worked on the Manhattan Project. Those who once calculated blast radii now computed orbital trajectories. The hands that had designed reactor chambers now built rocket engines. At Oak Ridge, scientists developed the first civilian reactor to supply power to the city of Tennessee, marking the dawn of the peaceful atomic energy era. The story of Oppenheimer also evolved. He was invited to teach at Princeton, where students still called him the father of the atomic age. A witness recounted in the Princeton lecture notes 1958. When he spoke of Trinity, his eyes drifted far away, as if he still saw the fireball exploding. Though cast out of politics, Oppenheimer became a moral symbol of the scientific community, a man willing to face the consequences of his own creation. From the fragments of war, America gradually turned destructive technology into a force for progress. Throughout the 1,950 seconds, the nation built civilian nuclear power systems, radiation medicine, and advanced measurement technologies. According to the U.S. Department of Energy Annual Report, 1,959, more than 50% of post-war nuclear applications were redirected toward medicine, agriculture, and space. Laboratories that once produced plutonium now research cancer treatments using cobalt-60. From the ashes of war, we built machines of healing, engineer Harold Urey wrote in his 1957 journal. The paradox of the 20th century lay there. Those who had created instruments of destruction became leaders in the technologies of healing. They did not deny their guilt, but they learned to turn their errors into lessons. Engineers who once heard the roar of Trinity used its data to develop reactor safety systems. Physicists who had trembled before that first light became guardians of ethical standards in research. Science is not evil, but it remembers. Oppenheimer said in 1963, when he received the Enrico Fermi Award, a statement of remorse and a humanist declaration for his time. The world had changed. The two nuclear powers continued to maintain a fragile balance, but in the space between, humanity began to learn to speak through knowledge instead of weapons. American universities opened international programs in atomic physics, welcoming students from over 40 countries. The United States, birthplace of the bomb, became the cradle of global understanding. The weapon that once divided the world was bridged again by American intellect through science and ethics. They proved that knowledge can transcend error, and that within the shadow of the atomic bomb, there still shines the light of human conscience. An old physicist at Princeton once said, looking westward toward the desert of Alamogordo, sinking into dusk, "The shadow of that fire still follows us, but in that shadow, we learn to see." Morning on the New Mexico desert, the sand had cooled, the sky was clearer, and the scar from the Trinity explosion remained, a grey-green circle of glass, shimmering in the early light. According to the U.S. Geological Survey Report, 1952, the layer of trinitite stretched nearly 1,100 meters, 2.5 centimeters thick, formed when sand melted at temperatures exceeding 10 million degrees Celsius. It lay still, a witness to the moment humanity touched the power of the stars. The bomb had exploded in the desert, but knowledge had crossed every border. From Alamogordo, the first reports of the Trinity test were sent to Washington, then to Princeton, Berkeley, and Cambridge. A chain of understanding began to unfold. According to the Atomic Energy Commission Bulletin 1946, data from Trinity produced more than 200 nuclear physics studies in the following decade, most led by American scientists. What was born from the darkness of war, somehow, illuminated an entire academic age. On a moral level, Americans experienced a spiritual reckoning unlike any before. When Hiroshima and Nagasaki were reduced to ashes, the question, "What have we done?" echoed through classrooms, research institutes, and newsrooms. Yet instead of evading it, America chose dialogue. In 1946, the Princeton Institute for Nuclear Research opened its first course on science and human responsibility. The scientists who had once stood beneath the light of Trinity now sat with students, describing the moment they realized knowledge could kill. One witness said, "When the light faded, we were no longer scientists, we were witnesses. From fear to admiration, from weapon to conscience, history proved that true strength lies not in destruction, but in the capacity to learn." Oppenheimer once said in a 1956 lecture at MIT, "The atomic bomb is not the end of knowledge, it is the beginning of responsibility." That sentence was quoted hundreds of times afterward in educational documents and scientific reports. It marked the turning point when America, instead of concealing, chose to share its experience, establish arms control mechanisms, and launch the Atoms for Peace program. According to United Nations proceedings, 1953, President Dwight D. Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program transferred civilian nuclear technology to 43 countries, laying the foundation for the global atomic energy system. In that same decade, the US funded over 12,000 international scholarships for students in physics, engineering, and energy. They did not teach how to make bombs, they taught how to control life energy. It was this choice that allowed knowledge to escape the bomb, to rise from the darkness of war and become a tool for peace. The story of the 20th century did not end with weapons, but with the transformation of humanity. Scientists once haunted by the blast of Trinity became pioneers in clean energy, astrophysics, and nuclear medicine. According to the American Institute of Physics survey, 1961, 70% of studies on medical radiation and 40% of inventions in civilian nuclear energy technology between 1950–1960 originated from former members of the Manhattan Project. They used the same principles that once created destruction to heal. In a 1963 symposium, physicist Isidore Rabi said, "We learned the structure of the atom, then we learned the structure of ourselves." The quote was inscribed on the wall of the Los Alamos laboratory as a reminder that every equation, every measurement, carries the imprint of humanity. That same year, Oppenheimer received the Enrico Fermi Award, a symbol of forgiveness and recognition. He stepped onto the stage, frail but serene. "We made a thing that could destroy the world," he said, "and then we learned to understand it." The applause rose not for victory, but for courage. During the 1960 seconds, as the space race ignited, nuclear knowledge became the foundation for a new age of exploration. Engineers who had served the Manhattan Project now joined the Apollo program, designing propulsion engines and navigation systems for spacecraft. According to NASA Technical History, 1969, over 35% of the Apollo 11 engineering team had previously worked in nuclear research. When Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, a newspaper in Los Alamos ran the headline, "From the Atom to the Stars." Meanwhile, the Soviet Union achieved similar milestones. They built their first nuclear power plant in Obninsk, operational in 1954, with an output of 5 megawatts. Yet the most remarkable event was that both superpowers, after years of rivalry, began scientific exchanges at international conferences. In 1959, American and Soviet delegations both attended the Geneva Conference on the peaceful uses of atomic energy. The image of scientists from both sides shaking hands on stage appeared on the cover of Life magazine under the title, "The Age of Shared Light." The United States had opened that era not through might, but through belief that knowledge must be shared to survive. That knowledge transcended borders, war, and fear, proving that true progress cannot be contained. As one researcher said in a 1985 PBS interview, "The bomb ended a war, but knowledge ended our isolation." The words still echo as a reminder that every limit is temporary. If this story makes you believe in human intellect and resilience, share it so more people remember. Imagine a single person, a single idea, can change the course of the world, from a dead desert to glowing power plants, from the roar of bombs to the hum of radiation machines. One follow, one like, helps us continue telling stories of courage, precision, and the impossible, the values that define America. Because sometimes, what is born of war becomes the very thing that saves humanity from its own fear. And in the dim light of that Trinity morning between shadow and hope, the only thing that remained was not the bomb, but knowledge itself, the knowledge that escaped the explosion to continue illuminating humankind. Have you ever heard the wail of an air raid siren in the night, or seen a flash in the sky followed by a silence so deep it frightened you? The war may be long over, but its memory lives on in those who survived it, those who understand that knowledge, courage, and faith are the only things that keep humanity standing amid chaos. If this story moves you, leave a comment and tell us what you or your family experienced during wartime. One follow, one like, can help us keep these memories alive so that the stories of intellect, sacrifice, and the will to live are never forgotten. Because when history is remembered, it is not just the past, it is a reminder that today's peace is a gift bought with a century of blood, tears, and light.